A Drink with a Witch by Laurie Lee. It was the brightest day of July, and at no time during the encounter did the light diminish, or one cloud obscure the sun. Yet at 4 o'clock in the afternoon my tongue went dry, my thumbs pricked, and looking into her eyes I smelt wet crows, midnight and burning, and I knew I was with a witch. It was not far from my home, or what remains of it, in a steep Cotswold valley, a fold in the limestone hills where the summer vegetation grows with all the matted fierceness of the Burmese jungle. Everything there seems more livid, greener, and more exotically lush than is decent to the general herbaceous smugness of the English countryside. In that valley wild parsley sprouts head high, bearing great branches of sickly flowers that throw a dizzying fume into the nostrils. Garlic sprawls rank and oniony in the woods, orchids and fungi smoulder among sweating roots, elder blossom piles up on the hedgerows like hot-smelling snow, and the lakes, cloaked with the green weed and pinned with dragonflies, break here and there with clusters of huge lilies that jag and sparkle like underwater explosions. The valley is nameless and leads nowhere. There is one yellow road which dies early, and from there on only a grass-tufted cart track winds up among the rabbit warrens and flowering brambles. There are badger runs in the brittle grass, and in scattered quarries you'll find the earths of foxes. Owls sit in the top of the elm trees, snoring like pensioners in the sun, and water otters, as smooth as seals, slip silently into the deep shaded streams. You will find little other evidence of life up there save for a broken tile spilling farm inhabited by a bearded melancholy bachelor, and half a mile away, at the furthest fold of the valley, the tiny chapel buried in its jungle. This chapel has been deserted for as long as anyone could remember. When I was a boy, inspired by its rainbow glass and vaulted roofs, we used it for several gaudy purposes: mock marriages, mock funerals, various innovations of which I can no longer speak, and once, oh ghastly unmentionable day, the disposal of a dead cat we found lying there. It was for the purpose of visiting again this unhallowed place that I was journeying that particular afternoon up in the green, hot, seething valley. I had not been there for 10 years, and as I pushed my way deeper into the tangle of brambles, I felt slightly affronted by the sight of the sprawling, insect-ridden wilderness. Each and every landmark we had made our own: Crusoe's cave, the path of Blackfeet, the killing oak where we crucified our enemies and ate their heads with boiled potatoes, all were obliterated by a surging, indifferent tide of green. As I skirted the ruined farm, however, I saw something which we as children had never been lucky enough to see: a white bullock with black horns lying dead under a wall. At first I thought it was merely asleep in the sun, but as I approached I realized that this was not so. A buzz of flies circled its staring eyes, and its pink tongue lay motionless between its teeth like a bitten rose. It was dead all right, and I left it with a faint, sinister feeling of privilege. It was 10 minutes later, when I was clearly within the vicinity of the chapel, but lost, that I came upon the woman. I was stumbling about in a thicket of rank-smelling nettles, searching for once-known paths. Then suddenly a creature rose up from the green-spiked depths like Venus rising from the sea. I say Venus because she was golden and unusually beautiful. She was about 30 years old, but much clearer in skin and more monumental in figure than the usual valley women, whose damp seems to smother and the steep hills to stunt. She had thick yellow hair, blue eyes, pale lips like alder leaves, and a long dress of hessian tied round the waist with rope. Her cheeks and arms were yellow with dried earth, and she clutched a few green weeds in her fingers. We eyed each other waringly for a moment across the summer nettles. The valley rang with water, and the pigeons shuffled in the trees above. Then I said, "Good afternoon," and she nodded. "Where are you from, then?" she asked, not shifting her gaze. Her voice was deeper than hereabouts. "From the village," I answered. "Do you see out my beast, then, alive or dead?" she asked. I thought of the bullock, but for some reason I felt compelled not to mention it. "I saw no beast," I answered. She took a deep, convulsive breath, and looked at her hands. "It's his wireless, then," she said. "He thinks he's cotched me with it, but I'll beat him." She tapped a locket of coiled silver that hung around her neck, and smiled to herself. It was a peculiar smile, slow and clear, like one who smiles asleep. I could not imagine what she was talking about, so I began afresh. "I came to see the chapel," I said, "but I don't seem to be able to find the path." "There ain't no path," she said. Then she looked at me slyly. "Save where my beast goes, and he don't show you, do he?" I looked upon the green enclosing weeds and said no. She took a handful of plants into her waistband and turned her back to me. "If these want to see the place," she said over her shoulder, "come, I'll show 'ee. There ain't no law I know of." She pushed her way forward, and I followed, and the nettles and parsley closed behind us like a broad foaming crested sea. The chapel appeared suddenly on its bank, pointing up among the tangle of dog roses. Outside the door stood a crooked crab tree, thickly furred with lichen, and from one of its branches hung a harp. The woman stood under the tree and looked up at it. The heavy shadows of the leaves fell over her face, and her body like a shower of black feathers. I could not think why I had never heard her before. Strangeness and fascination began to creep over the surface of my skin. "Do you play the harp?" I asked. She glanced at me sideways through a coil of hair. "Aye," she said harshly. "By wind and wireless, when things be what they seem, he plays all right." She swung round on me and raised her voice. "You says you've never seen out of that beast? We'll find out, fella." There was not a breath of air in the valley. The gold dust of the apple boughs stuck in my throat like pepper. "You give me a drink, and we'll talk about it," I said. The woman looked me up and down, and then turned to the chapel door and beckoned me inside. There was one bare room as I remembered it, the vaulted roof, the stained glass windows blazing, the sun threw the figures of saints like lantern sides against the walls, and the woman, as she moved about before me, changed from blue to purple, from green to burning rose. Occasionally, like a mystic translation, the ghostly glowing face of some bearded prophet lay superimposed upon her own, and she looked at me with double eyes through double features. As I suspected, she lived there. The place had been cleared of all its fallen stones. There was a brass bed, a table, jars of green water, a bucket of dried weeds, and a radio with a horn. The woman told me to sit down and poured me a cup of something from a jug. Then she placed a plateful of tiny strawberries before me and settled herself at the table. She grew suddenly arch like a suburban hostess. "You fancy a little wine on a hot day?" she asked, patting her hair. "It's right wine, kept long, and I makes a good brew, though I says it myself." "What kind is it?" I asked. "Bee orchid," she said. "You never tasted that afore, I'll warrant." It glittered in the cup, transparent, cool, the colour of emeralds. I took a deep breath and a gulp, and its taste was unearthly and undefinable. It was very strong, and went immediately to the eyes. The room began to rock and smoulder, and the woman to burn like a golden brand. "Tell me of the beast," she commanded suddenly, dropping her mincing manner. "None says they seen him, live or dead. But he ain't fur. I took un browsing this marnin', and he was arty. I look at it for him this noon, and he's gone. You see him, fella? Tell us now." Among the hazy chapel fire that surrounded her eyes were blue and brilliant as ice. I was helpless, and I told her. "I may have seen your beast," I said, "but he was dead under a wall." She was rocking in her chair, her hands clasped tight. "It's that whispered chap at the farm," she said. "He's been at un. I knows he thinks I bled his pigs, but we've beat him." "How could he have done such a thing?" I asked, not knowing rightly what he'd done. "He works a wireless on me," she said, "but I know when he's at it. He can't be a twiddlin', but I knows." She nodded across at the radio with its ancient horn. "That tells me when he's working on me, but I got one here that's stronger every time." She put her fingers to her throat and raised the locket before her eyes, caressing it like a jewel. She suddenly looked very old. "What is it?" I asked. "I'll not show thee," she said, "but he's a strong un. He guards my beasts, aged and all." "But your beast is dead," I said. "It's a great pity, but no doubt you'll get compensation." "Aye, I'll get my compensation," she cried. "Beasts still live, ours are dead, and them that lives can die. That whiskered un with his sick visage, he'll know. He'll not work no more on me, not with his wireless. Look here, fella, do you want to know what this be in? He be stronger than all, and if things be what they seem, he'll show 'ee." She was rigid with intent, with the locket in her hand, and I made an immediate intimation that something was going to happen. "Don't seek ye or move in the sun," she said. "Don't drink or breathe. Hearken only. Things will be what they seem." All her body seemed wrapped about the locket. The roots of her limbs and her fingers all led to it. Her eyes burned upon it. There was a long pause. Then all of a sudden, distantly and dryly, the silver grill buzzed with a tiny noise. The woman's face went still and blind. With dreamy fingers she broke open the fragile case and shook something onto the palm of her hand. It was a black-horned beetle, quivering with rapid, soundless wings. The woman put down her mouth to the throbbing insect, and whether it was the wine or a touch of the sun I cannot say, but as she crouched in that golden posture she seemed to be made of glass, a figure of fierce and formal beauty lit by some ghostly interior fire. Her hair webbed, her shoulders like a dazzle of sun, and the beetle in the nest of her hand whirred slowly against her lips. Then she raised her eyes and looked through me, listening intently. "Don't move, fella," she breathed. "He's the sign and the beast of 'em all. Don't move, but hearken." I listened, and there was not a sound to be heard, not a bird in the trees, not a breath of wind in the stifling July wood. Even the bubbling pools and the spring seemed to have died among the stones. Then, hardly noticeable at first, there rose a strange light moaning on the air, a trembling chord, far, faint, and sweet, the throb of the harp in the tree, and almost immediately it was followed by stumbling footsteps in the wood, the solid tread of some heavy animal advancing towards us through the tangled nettles. I sat motionless, watching the woman. A shadow fell across her rapt, enchanted face. I spun round and saw a white bullock with black horns standing in the doorway. My tongue went dry, my thumbs pricked, and as I turned to look into the woman's eyes I smelt wet crows, midnight and burning, and I knew I was with a witch.